Hi Dark Realmers, it's horror author Michael J. Elliott here with you, and today in the Dark Realm Diaries we're doing another of our features of book and movie trivia, and today we're going to be looking at Robert Bloch's classic novel Psycho. Robert Bloch had a prolific career spanning more than 60 years in fact, and right up until his death in 1974. Now everyone knows his seminal work Psycho, but he also wrote a huge number of short stories, and he wrote novels too, and some of the novels he wrote were The Star Stalker, Night Word, and Strange Eons. And he also was very fond of a pun, and some of his short story collections were titled, or some of his short stories were titled From the Mouth of Graves, or Out of the Mouth of Graves, and Tales in a Jugular Vein. Trekkies, or sorry, you're trekkers now, aren't you? You might be interested to learn that he actually wrote 3 episodes of the original Star Trek series, and they were What Little Girls Are Made Of, Cat's Paw, and Wolf in the Fold. In the 70s, he wrote 5 feature films for Amicus Productions, and they were stories or films based on his short stories, and they were had a theme going through them, and they were short stories within a framework. And some of those films were The House That Dripped Blood, which was a film about all the previous residents who'd lived in this house and their stories. Another one was called Asylum. It was named in England Tales That Witness Madness, and that was set in a mental asylum where a doctor goes along and talks to a new member of staff and explains to them their particular case, which involves stories that Robert Bloch wrote. You can find those on DVD at Amazon and other retailers. They are really fun to watch. They are a bit sort of maybe campish for a new generation of horror fans, but the writing is undoubtedly brilliant. Now, there's a common belief that Robert Bloch based his character of Norman Bates on real-life serial killer Ed Gein. And that's a theory that's been around for many years. So is it true? Well, it is and it isn't. Robert Bloch himself basically said that Norman Bates was his own character that came out of his own mind, and he was totally different to Ed Gein. I'll talk about Ed Gein in a moment, but he was basically a necrophiliac, and also a cannibal, and Norman Bates was nothing like that. So in that sense, no, the character Norman Bates wasn't based on Ed Gein, but Robert Bloch did say that he was fascinated by the fact that Ed Gein could live in seclusion and get away with all these murders, and that's what inspired him with Psycho, the fact that Norman Bates could live alone and be so cut off, and yet no one would suspect him of being a serial killer. And that's what Robert Bloch basically based that character on, was that aspect of Ed Gein. Ed Gein was probably one of the most famous serial killers that was known in America and actually throughout the world. Okay, he became the inspiration behind such literary characters as Norman Bates, Leatherface, Toby Hunter's Leatherface in the Texas Chainsaw Massacre, and Buffalo Bill in The Silence of the Lambs. Now, he was born in 1906, and his mother detested his father, who was a worthless alcoholic. Now, she was a strict Lutheran, and she basically preached at Ed and his brother that all women were natural prostitutes and they couldn't be trusted and they were the work of the devil, and that basically the world was immoral and they should avoid it. And she did everything she possibly could to make sure the boys didn't interact with anyone or begin any social friendships. So she very much became the dominant influence in their. Now, there was suspicion that Ed Gein had murdered his own brother. That wasn't proven, and the coroner actually declared that his brother's cause of death was asphyxiation. But not long after that, his mother had a stroke and her health deteriorated, and she had another stroke and she was practically paralysed and bedridden, and Ed Gein basically doted on her and looked after her until she finally died on December 29th, 1945. Now, it wasn't long after that that Ed Gein began taking an unnatural interest in Nazi atrocities and death cults, and he began to dig up corpses from the local cemetery, and when the police actually found him, they found in his house that he'd made items such as waste paper baskets and bowls, everything from human skin and from body parts, and he'd actually started or made a suit of skin so that he could actually turn into his mother in his own mind, which is where the Silence of the Lambs sort of reference comes into, Dark Realmers. Now, he was there were other murders which I won't go into, but he was found guilty but insane, and he spent the rest of his life in a mental institution where he died in 1984. Sorry about that. And he became just an infamous icon, really. People actually came and chipped away pieces of his headstone as a souvenir. And one sideshow impresario bought his old pickup truck that he used to transport his victims' bodies in for his carnival, and charged $25 admission to see that. Very grisly and a bit uncalled for. Okay, but because he's been such a fascinating legend, there have been many retelling of his story, and probably one of the best is a movie called Deranged, starring the late great Robert Bloch. And if you get a chance to check that out, I highly recommend that, and that'll give you a much better idea of the intricacies of Psycho as well. Robert Bloch was offered a blind bid for the rights to Psycho. Now, a blind bid is where the bidder is not known or is unnamed. He was originally offered $7,500 for the rights, and that increased to $9,500. Now, he did sell the rights, but unfortunately, because his contract with Simon & Schuster said that he was not to make any bonuses from any further sales, he didn't receive anything more from Psycho, the movie, anything. And now, after Simon & Schuster took their 15% and his agent took 10%, he was roughly left with about $6,700 before taxes from the sale of Psycho. Now, we can all be eternally grateful to the late great Alfred Hitchcock for giving us Psycho, because if he hadn't had his way, the movie wouldn't have eventuated. Paramount Studios loathed it. They didn't want to have it made, and Alfred Hitchcock had one movie left to make for them on his contract. Now his assistant had read a review of Psycho and decided it would be a perfect project for him. Psycho had already been rejected by other filmmakers, and it was up to Alfred Hitchcock to push for it. He told the studio that he'd waive his normal $250,000 director fee in exchange for 60% of the movie's negative. So that's another way of saying the movie rights. He also offered to film it in black and white to save money, and he also offered to have it filmed by his Alfred Hitchcock television series crew to make the movie, and that way they would also save costs too. So in that way, after all those giving and taking and toing and froing, the studio finally agreed, and Alfred Hitchcock began Psycho. Although the film remained fairly faithful to the book, there were a number of changes, and the most notable in that regard was the character of Norman Bates. In the book, he was described as middle-aged, balding and overweight. He was a drunkard, and he had a fascination with occult and pornography, and he used to turn into Mother when he got drunk. Now they changed the character, and it's hard to imagine him being portrayed as that when we think of Anthony Perkins, who was very slim, and his character was much more refined, much more genteel than the book portrayal of Norman Bates. Also too, in the classic shower scene, the character of Marion Crane was actually beheaded in the book. Now they felt that was far too gruesome for audiences of 1960, and hence we ended up with the famous shower scene that we all know. Now, let's get on to the movie's most famous scene, and one that sends chills up people's spines even today. And of course, I'm talking about the shower scene. Now, that scene did take 7 days to make, believe it or not, okay? Now, there's a rumour going around that they actually used cold water in order to make Janet Leigh scream louder, and she denied that. She said that they thought about her comfort all the time during that filming, and she had hot water for that scene, or warm water, of course. Now, there was a number of edits and cuts used. There were 50 different cuts in that scene alone, and there were 77 camera angles. Now that's amazing, and what is even more amazing is that despite the frenzied attack and the just brutality of it all, there is not one cut in there where we see the knife puncture flesh. Okay, now I've always thought that scene only took 30 or 40 seconds, but it's actually 3 minutes. Also too, this is true that they used chocolate sauce for the blood. Now that was for 2 reasons. Firstly, because the chocolate sauce had a better texture and a better consistency than stage blood or television and film blood, and also because they had chosen to film in black and white, it looked a lot better and a lot more realistic in black and white. Okay, it's hard to believe that shower scene almost ended up with no music in it. I know. Alfred Hitchcock originally wanted that to be totally silent, but composer Bernard Herrmann had actually written a small score for that scene called The Murder, and he insisted that Alfred Hitchcock at least listen to it. Well, of course, he was so impressed with it, he did use it, and not only that, he loved it so much he doubled Bernard Herrmann's salary. Now, today, you cannot watch Psycho and not think of those striking, screeching violins and that discordant and terrifying sound, and it almost never happened, Dark Realmers. Now I'll just leave you with a couple of minor facts about the movie for you, Dark Realmers. It became so successful, as I said, earning $12 million on release. Despite it getting mixed reviews, the public got right behind it, and that meant that both Alfred Hitchcock received an Academy Award nomination for Best Director, and Janet Leigh scored a nomination for Best Supporting Actress. Now here's just one final point for you, Dark Realmers. Robert Bloch went on to write a sequel, Psycho 2, and Hollywood went on to make Psycho 2 and then 3. But both the book and the movie were totally different from each other because Robert Bloch had no more influence on Psycho or the movie because he'd sold the rights. His book was vastly different. Now, I read the book and I was, well, yeah, frankly, I was disappointed. The movie, of course, cashed in on Anthony Perkins' popularity, and it did reasonably well. So there you go, Dark Realmers. I hope you've learned something interesting about author Robert Bloch, about his career, also about the movie Psycho. Now, if you have liked it and you've enjoyed today's video, please leave a like, and also I love hearing your comments too. Okay, so tell me what you thought, tell me what you found out, if you've learned something new, and please, I love having you here on my channel, so don't forget to subscribe, okay? And I'll see you next time, Dark Realmers, on the Dark Realm Diaries.